The fog clung to the water like a living thing, thick and damp, wrapping the Selene in a muffled world of soft gray. The diesel engine purred beneath Elena Drake's boots, a sound she knew as well as her own breath. 38 years old, sun-weathered, lean as a mast cable, she stood at the helm in a worn windbreaker, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting casually against the steel case strapped to the deck beside her. It was the only thing on board she guarded more closely than her dog, a broad-shouldered mutt named Barlow, who lay at her feet with his head on his paws, amber eyes flicking toward the horizon like he sensed something she hadn't yet seen. The air smelled of salt and diesel, layered with the faint sweetness of baitfish from the ice chest at her stern. It should have been an easy run, just another quiet morning miles off the Florida coast, but Barlow's low growl crawled into her ears before the engines appeared. A shadow took shape in the mist, high-sided and gray, slicing the water at speed. Then came the bark of a loudspeaker, flat and metallic in the fog. "Vessel, Selene. This is the United States Coast Guard. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded." Elena didn't flinch. She eased the throttle back until the engine rumbled low, the boat settling into the swell. Her eyes stayed on the cutter as it loomed closer, the bow wave rolling toward her hull. The Coast Guard was standard enough out here, but the way they came in, tight and fast, weapons already slung across their chests, made something in her spine go rigid. 3 of them boarded. Boots hit her deck hard. The lead petty officer, broad-shouldered and flushed from the climb, scanned the vessel with quick, assessing eyes. "Captain Drake," he said without introduction, "we've received reports of illegal cargo moving through this sector. We'll be inspecting your vessel for contraband and unregistered weapons." Barlow's hackles rose, but Elena's voice was steady. "You'll find fish and diesel, petty officer. Nothing more." They split up, one man heading aft toward the cooler, another moving toward the small cabin. The petty officer's gaze landed on the steel case beside her, locked with reinforced hinges and a digital pad. He took a step forward. "And this?" Elena's hand shifted ever so slightly, palm pressing flat on the lid. "That doesn't get opened." He laughed, the kind of short, derisive sound men make when they think they've found a pressure point. "On the contrary, Captain, everything gets opened." Her eyes met his, calm, unblinking. "You put your hands on that case," she said quietly, "and you'll be making a call you don't want to make." The laugh wavered, but he reached anyway. She moved first, pulling a black, laminated card from the inner pocket of her jacket. It was no bigger than a driver's license, but the gold inlaid insignia caught the weak light, an emblem they didn't recognize, embossed above a string of clearance codes. The petty officer froze. "What is that?" "Higher clearance than you've ever seen," Elena said. He didn't touch the card, didn't touch the case, just stood there, mouth tightening. The tension shifted in the air, not anger now, but unease. He took a slow step back, glancing over his shoulder toward the cutter. A moment later, his radio crackled to life. "Captain," he said into it, voice sharper now. "We have a situation. Request immediate confirmation from higher command. Sending visual now." Through the fog, the cutter's silhouette loomed, and Elena watched the dark figure on its bridge lift binoculars to his face. The radio hissed again. The captain's reply came low, clipped, and laced with something she'd rarely heard in a man like that. Uncertainty. The cutter's deck smelled of oil and salt, its steel plates humming faintly underfoot as Elena stepped across with Barlow close at her side. The petty officer kept a hand near his sidearm, but the hostility had bled out of him. It wasn't gone, just masked now, replaced with something taut and uneasy. Around them, crewmen moved with deliberate slowness, their conversations clipped and low. Heads turned when she passed. Eyes lingered a second too long before snapping away. The lead petty officer guided her through a narrow passageway to a small wardroom, the kind meant for briefings or mess duty when space was tight. A metal table took up most of the room. The steel case from the Selene sat in the center, its matte surface catching the harsh glow of the overhead light. It was exactly where she expected it to be, untouched, but too close to curious hands. He gestured for her to sit. She did. Barlow sprawled against the bulkhead like he belonged there, head resting on his paws, but eyes tracking every movement. The petty officer leaned forward, forearms on the table. "Captain Drake," he began, the formality paper, thin. "That card you showed us, where did you get it?" Elena rested her elbows on the armrests of the chair, her posture easy, almost lazy. "Why don't you tell me," she said, "the name of the officer in charge of Special Maritime Operations Liaison at Sector Jacksonville HQ?" The words landed with a dead weight, the petty officer's mouth shut. Behind him, one of the junior crewmen who had been pretending to review a clipboard actually froze mid-turn, his eyes cutting toward her. Nobody in the Coast Guard who wasn't directly involved in black-level maritime ops had any reason to know that position even existed, let alone ask for it by name. The petty officer's voice was quieter now. "How do you?" Elena didn't let him finish. Her gaze flicked to the case. "You don't open that," she said flatly. "Not unless you're ready for a federal investigation to shut this cutter down before you make port. And I promise you, it won't be pleasant. I've seen it happen. To better men." He glanced at the case like it had started ticking. The junior crewman shifted uneasily. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer. Without another word, the petty officer straightened and left, his boots clanging against the deck. The hatch clicked shut behind him. Through the thin bulkhead, Elena could hear his muffled voice on a secure line. Not long after, his tone dropped, stripped of authority. A pause. Another short reply, even lower. When he came back, his face was pale, a thin sheen of sweat above his upper lip. He didn't look at her directly. "We have new orders," he said, his voice carrying the strained professionalism of someone reading from a script. "You'll be held in a secure compartment until further notice." Elena smiled, then not big, not mocking, just a small curl at the corner of her mouth, the kind that didn't need words to make its point. The crew didn't meet her eyes as they led her away. They didn't have to. She could feel it in the way their shoulders hunched and their glances darted. They were wondering the same thing, all of them. What kind of person makes higher command call back in under 2 minutes? The room was small, square, and without windows, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent tube that washed everything in a shade of bureaucratic gray. Elena sat in a metal chair bolted to the deck, her hands resting loosely on the table in front of her. The steel case had been placed on the opposite side, far enough to be symbolic but close enough for her to keep it in her periphery. She didn't look at it directly. She didn't need to. Nobody had dared touch it yet. Through the door came a constant low hum of activity boots moving briskly on steel, radios crackling with clipped exchanges, the occasional hiss of a secure line connecting. The air in the room was still, but the ship felt tense under her feet, as if the crew's unease had seeped into the hull itself. Somewhere above, the cutter's intelligence officer was running her information through every system they had clearance for. She imagined their faces when the search results came back. Elena Drake, deceased. Killed in action, 12 years ago, off the Horn of Africa during a classified joint operation. No photograph, no cause of death. Just a terse, sealed notation and an absence of any supporting documents. The kind of file that was more a warning than a record. The hatch opened. A young lieutenant stepped in, shoulders too stiff, eyes darting to the case before fixing on her. We're making a call," he said, as if it were an admission. "Restricted extension, Pentagon." He hesitated, then added under his breath, "They're saying you're not supposed to exist." Elena leaned back in the chair, crossing one leg over the other. "That's a matter of perspective," she said, and the lieutenant left as quickly as he'd arrived. Up in the communications room, the cutter's captain was speaking into a handset connected by a series of encrypted relays. The voice that answered was calm, but edged with steel. "Calder." The captain cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a civilian vessel detained." The operator presented Special Forces identification, black lamination, gold insignia, clearance codes we can't verify. Silence, then a voice sharp enough to cut the air. Describe the insignia. When the captain did, there was no mistaking the shift on the other end of the line. Admiral James Calder had been in the business long enough to bury more secrets than he'd ever admit, and this was one of the deepest. Where is she now? In our secure room, sir. She. Release her immediately, Calder said, and put her on the phone, now. Minutes later, the handset was in Elena's hand. The line hissed faintly, the way old secure lines do. Captain Drake, Calder said, his voice lower now, almost personal. Elena, she replied. Didn't think you'd still be on the clock. Not by choice, listen to me carefully. If you're moving the package, keep going. You're burned now, they'll come for you before nightfall. Her gaze flicked to the case. So the leak's confirmed. There was a pause on the line, just long enough to tell her he didn't like the question. You know the protocol. Get it where it needs to go, and disappear. The connection clicked dead, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent light above her. When the hatch opened again, the captain wouldn't meet her eyes. You're free to go, ma'am, he said, voice stiff. Elena stood, picked up the steel case, and walked past him without a word. The cutter's engines rumbled low as they idled beside the Selene, the fog curling in long, thin tendrils between the two hulls. Crewmen moved with quiet efficiency, unspooling a fuel line across the narrow gap. No one met Elena's eyes. No one asked about the steel case that had been locked back in her cabin as soon as she'd stepped aboard her own vessel. Even the petty officer who had first tried to put his hands on it kept his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, as if pretending she wasn't there would make the memory of their earlier exchange fade faster. Barlow paced the deck, nails clicking on the fiberglass, occasionally sniffing at the air like he, too, could sense the way the mood had shifted. The fueling was quick, almost clinical, the crew doing their jobs with the kind of precision that comes from wanting a task done and over with. When the last couplings were sealed and the lines reeled back to the cutter, the captain gave a short wave from his bridge, not a farewell so much as a quiet acknowledgement. The cutter's engines powered up, the bow turning away to lead her toward open water. An escort. Not a request, not an offer. An order from somewhere far above their pay grades. Elena followed in the cutter's wake, the Selene's hull cutting smoothly through the light chop. She didn't glance back at the case, she didn't have to. It was wedged beside the helm now, where she could drop a hand onto it at any moment. Inside that matte steel shell were 3 encrypted drives, the sum of 18 months of work. 18 months of living in marinas and fishing villages, of blending in with the easy rhythms of charter work while slipping off at night to meet informants in unlit bars or shadow suspect vessels into dark harbors. The data on those drives mapped every movement, every bribe, every human cargo shipment run by a syndicate that had been moving people through the Caribbean for over a decade. It wasn't just names and coordinates, it was proof. Images taken through scopes from half a mile away, audio pulled from bugs hidden in wheelhouses. Financial records so damning they could choke the legal system for years. All tied to men who smiled at ribbon cuttings in daylight and sold families into slavery at night. The rendezvous was set for tonight, in the thin no-man's band of international waters between two disinterested nations. An unmarked vessel, blacked out from stem to stern, would be waiting. No port, no paperwork, just a brief transfer from her deck to theirs. The case passed into hands she trusted more than her own. Once it left her possession, the intelligence would travel a different chain, one that Calder controlled. She could almost feel the seconds ticking away. The syndicate didn't know she had the evidence yet, but that window was closing. Word would spread. Ships would move. And if Calder was right, she'd have company before the sun touched the horizon. The cutter began to fade in the mist ahead, its shape dissolving into the shifting gray. Elena eased back on the throttle, peeling away from their path, adjusting her heading toward a place only she and one other man knew. The wind picked up, flattening the surface of the water and carrying with it the faint scent of rain. She rested a hand on the steel case, the metal cold beneath her palm. Almost there, she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she meant the rendezvous or the trouble she could already feel closing in. By the time the horizon swallowed the last hint of the cutter's wake, her mind was clear. The mission was still alive. And if it came down to it, she'd go down fighting before she let that case fall into the wrong hands.